Chapter 4. Claire's fever broke. The receding delirium left her struggling to separate dream from memory. The last thing she could recall clearly was arguing with Mistress Blakeworthy. "Of course he wouldn't have just left like that," she had shouted. "There's no need to get so agitated, my girl," Mistress Blakeworthy had admonished. "You'll see your brother, sure enough, when he's finished his training. You honestly didn't expect him to give up the honour of a place at Amesby Academy, did you? He said he wanted to go to Shaw's." "Over Amesby? You must have misunderstood." "No, he—" "Now listen, Claire, this is getting silly," Blakeworthy interrupted. "I understand that you're upset, and I've indulged you, but this denial achieves nothing. Your brother is gone, not forever, but you will not see him for a while. If I were you, I'd try to focus on your own studies, since that is the only thing you can do to bring the day closer." "No, you're lying." "Watch your tone, girl," Mistress Blakeworthy had warned, looking around at the class. "I'll not put up with disrespect or any more of this nonsense." "He's not gone to Amesby," she screamed back. "He'd never go without—" Echo. He'd never have gone without Echo, and Echo would never have been left behind willingly. They were lying, but she could not risk telling them how she knew and lose her last link to her brother. She tried to find out what the familiar knew, but the lizard had no explanation of what had become of his master. It was as if Adrian had simply vanished, and it seemed to Claire that only she and Echo even cared. Claire had raised hell all day, ignoring every threat in order to remain silent. She would have continued to make a nuisance of herself, but she'd started to become sick during supper that night. The master on duty accused her of making herself overwrought, and insisted she finish her meal. By the time she had done that, she had almost been unable to stand. The other students had helped her back to her room, though she begged them not to. She'd been sure there was something wrong, but everyone just put it down to her growing illness. She remembered teachers coming to the dorm, ordering the girls out lest it was contagious. She could still vaguely recall Echo trying to keep her awake. The gecko had been frantic, unable to find his master, and then unable to get through to Claire as she slipped into her fever and growing delirium. How long ago had that been? Time had no meaning to her anymore. She was sure that her eyes were open, but the room around her was so devoid of light that they might as well have been closed. It was not her room, she was sure of that. Strange after-images played over her retina. Phantoms of her retreating fever, or was her battered mind trying to make sense of the impenetrable blackness? "Echo," she whispered into the darkness, but there was no response. She tried to move, but her arms were inexplicably heavy. Her palms twinged. Blisters ruptured as she propped herself up. Instead of the soft give of pillows or mattress, she felt cold stone beneath her fingers. Cold stone in a thick coating of soft granules, still warm from her body heat. Why was she not in her room? It was where they had taken her when she had become ill. She could not remember being moved anywhere else. She idly flicked the clinging particles from her naked shoulder, then went rigid at the realization that she was wearing no clothing at all. "Hello?" she called out nervously. "Is there anyone here?" When there was no response, she began to grope about, searching for something with which to clothe herself. She felt about blindly with exhausted movement. Her hand closed on the unmistakable fibrous smoothness of unvarnished timber. Ignoring the ache of her hand, she slid her fingers across the contours of the wood. Somehow these shapes were familiar, finding echoes in her half-forgotten dreams. She vaguely remembered carving, the curve of an ankle, a shoulder, the arch of a neck, the angles of a face so like her own. 2 points of yellow light which glowed like amber in the sunlight bloomed between her splayed fingers and illuminated the darkness. With a gasp, Claire snatched her hands back from the sculpture's wooden face and looked into its glowing eyes. In the reflected gleam of those 2 dim suns, she saw the chamber around her, windowless and sealed by a heavy door. Had she hurt her hands thrashing futilely at that door before she began to carve? She could not remember, any more than she could remember the hours during which the wood shavings and sawdust had spilled on the floor. The carving was exquisite in its detail. The arms and legs were perfectly formed and proportioned, a body that echoed her own naked form almost exactly. But whereas she shrunk from the light and looked in vain for something to cover herself, the sculpture stood unashamed, primal, rendered golden in the light of its own amber eyes. Claire studied her opposite with growing wonder. How had she shaped this girl in absolute darkness? What was the nature of her affliction, and why did she find herself here? At the sculptor's feet in the centre of the chamber, a broad, ragged stump ringed with thin, twisted branches was all that was left of the tree that had somehow grown here, hidden from the sun. And all about it were scattered the tools that someone had left, somehow knowing she would use them. No, not at the sculptor's feet, Claire realized as she looked closer. The feet had yet to be finished. The top part of the arch was already carved, but the underside was still fused with the tree. "Finish me," something in her head insisted, with a sound like wild leaves hissing in the wind. Without thinking about it, Claire took up a small chisel in her aching hand, pushing through the thin outer branches, and began to work on the fibrous wood under the sculptor's feet. Dark sap, ruddy and thick as syrup, oozed around the cutting metal. It mixed with the drops of her own blood, both old and new. There was no pain for either of them now. They were both past that. I didn't do this in darkness, Claire thought distractedly to herself. The tree always provided the light, watching with those glowing eyes. Why would it do that? The question slipped through her mind unexamined, dismissed as quickly as, why am I doing this? "Soon," came the soothing tones. "Soon there will be no need to ask. We will be free." A last cut freed the statue's first foot, and Claire began to smooth away the roughness underneath. All her training with carving told her that the wood should still be too fresh to work this way, but despite the drops beneath it, there was no sap on the almost perfect foot. Some part of her protested that the carved leg would have had to move to give her proper access to the sole she was smoothing under her hand, but all reason evaporated in the glow of the twin points of light above her. Eventually, satisfied with the contours of the left foot, she set her chisel to the right. Before she could strike the first blow, a resounding crash sounded from the door to her chamber. The sound felt dampened and distant in the dimness of her cell. Was she still dreaming? She must be, or the statue could not have looked up. Had she carved its teeth so sharp? She wondered as she worked at the last foot. If she had, it was the only flaw in her work. "Don't worry," the statue intoned. "Just cut." Again a boom from the door. The heavy metal-bound wood was straining on its hinges, but Claire did not look back. She knelt, reaching down into the scarred base of the tree, setting the head of the chisel against the foot. "Hurry!" came the breathy hiss. "Claire!" a man's voice called from outside. She yearned to answer, but her throat was swollen shut. "Claire!" the call came again. Then Echo's excitement flowed in from beyond the door. It broke the spell, causing her to drop the chisel and take an uncertain step backwards. "She's alive!" the gecko exclaimed. "Hurry!" Another impact left the door straining on warped hinges. A thin line of torchlight spilled over the stone floor. "Quickly! Cut me free!" the sculpture hissed. Its flashing eyes drew her attention. "Claire, get away from it!" the man warned from behind the straining door. She vainly struggled to remember where she had heard that accent before. "No, look at me! Free me!" the statue urged. "Claire, don't do what it says. Just look at it. It's an abomination," Echo warned, his thoughts swollen with fear. Still unmoving, Claire looked at the statue and its glowing eyes, looked beneath to the black and twisted roots that seemed even now to move slowly in the foul-smelling earth that filled the hole in the stonework at the center of the room. Cancerous growths bulged from those thick roots, slick mouths and crooked hands, foul and dreadfully alive. For all its beauty, the statue had dwelt under this skin. Behind her, the door buckled and flew across the room in a shower of sparks. The torchlight flooding in made her realize how dim and jaundiced the tree's light had always been, pale and sick like the thin and apparently withered branches which lolled from its battered trunk. Tiny yellow eyes watched her from the end of each stick-like branch. These branches were the same as the one she had carved, just not thick yet, not fully grown. The creatures that dwelt within were not ready to be cut free and smooth, polished like fruit. Bill Stark stood outlined in the doorway, a burning torch in one hand and his thick-barreled pistol in the other. His weapon was held against the head of a captive, a master Claire had only seen a few times in her life and barely recognized. She had always wondered what he taught at the school, but now a new and more horrifying possibility occurred to her. Perhaps he had never taught, but rather tended these dim chambers and what grew in them. "You all right, Miss Watts?" Bill queried, murder dancing behind his eyes as he looked at his captive. She began to answer, but an impulse from Echo cut her short. "Claire!" The lizard's warning hit her like a poleaxe, causing her to flinch just in time to avoid being seized by the carved figure in front of her. Even as she fell backwards, the sculptor's fingers tore painfully at her arms. Blood stained the hard tips of the statue's fingers. Claire watched in horror as, instead of dripping from the grasping fingers, the blood was absorbed into the pale, unstained wood. "Claire, get back!" Bill yelled. He kicked his prisoner into the room and onto his knees. Bill followed, keeping his weapon level. "You don't move," he warned the crouching master, as he threw his torch to the floor and helped drag Claire out of the reach of the flaming statue. "By all rights, I should leave you with that," Bill snarled at his captive. He indicated the maddened creature still trying to pull itself free from the twisted trunk at the center of the room. "You know how she'll be craving blood now. It's no more than you deserve, and kinder than this child's fate would have been." "No, please," the master begged, his face as pale as if his body had already been drained. "Don't worry, I'm not for killing in such a way. If I decide to kill you, I'll do it clean. Besides, leaving you with it would mean leaving this thing alive." "You wouldn't dare. It wouldn't be the first of these abominations that I've burned." Bill's grim smile didn't touch his eyes. "If you take the girl, you might get away, but if you do this, they'll never stop hunting you." "You don't hear so good, old friend." The buccaneer laughed. "I said this wasn't the first time I'd done such." "You're mad to even say it." "As if what you're doing here is sane." Bill snarled. With one hand he undid his cloak and draped it over Claire's shoulders. "Thank you, William," she sighed, drawing the fabric tight about her. "No need to thank me. It's rare I gets to play the gentleman. Quite refreshing, really." "Thank me, I brought him," Echo said, appearing at her shoulder and baring his fangs at the mad creature still tearing at the flagstones in an attempt to reach them. "I'll never look at a tree the same way again," he added. "This is no ordinary tree, Longtail." Bill bent to retrieve his guttering torch. "No, I can scarce believe it," the gecko mocked. "Sarcasm does not become you, wall crawler. Your tongue may be long, but it's not as sharp as you seem to think." "But I don't talk with my—" "It makes little difference how you make yourself heard. The important thing is not to take this abomination lightly. It'll tear us all to pieces given half a chance, and it would have done far worse to Claire. If we come any later, it would have captured her soul. It's what this filth and his colleagues were waiting for," the tall man said grimly, giving his captive a kick and raising his torch higher. Exposed to new oxygen, the torch flared. It threw the twisted outlines of the tree into relief. Claire shivered as she looked at her own face carved into the living wood, screaming its madness, its need. "Mine! Still mine! Mine!" the thing hissed, never turning its baleful eyes from her. "No, no more." Bill advanced towards the center of the room. His tone became deeper as he began to sing. Not the bawdy shanties to which he was accustomed, but a strange harmony both old and foreign that seemed to slow the creature's movements. "No sun has touched your branches, nor water fed your root. No leaf in summer wind dances, and blood fed your first shoot. Suffer now the touch of light, the lick of cleansing flame. Burn away the smoke of night, and leave the soul its name." For the first time the statue looked away from Claire, and she felt as if a weight had fallen from her. "Mine!" the creature hissed again. "Mine!" it reiterated, turning the full force of its will on the advancing pirate. If he felt the psychic pressure, Bill gave no sign. He simply continued to advance on the living statue. Hard hands, claws, raked the air before his face, but they were slow now, too slow to stop him thrusting his torch deep into its tangled roots. Flames swelled instantly in the tree's black heart. The statue screamed in dreadful anguish. At that moment, Bill's captive leapt up and made for the door. Bill spun. He fired, putting a large hole in the doorframe and stopping the master in his tracks. Bill closed the distance between them in a single bound and angrily thrust the pistol with its remaining charge under the master's quivering chin. "Did I not say to keep still?" he growled, leaning towards his captive and meeting his wild stare with a single icy eye. Bill whipped the back of the pistol across the fool's face, sending him reeling back into the room. Blood flew, hissing in the glowing blaze. "You will do as I say if you want to escape with your miserable life," Bill yelled, leveling his gun. Left unnoticed on the floor, Claire opened her mouth in a soundless scream. She watched as the statue tore itself free from the pyre. Its ragged foot was little more than a smouldering stump. The charred mannequin crawled frantically away from the growing flame, momentarily oblivious to all considerations but its own agony. It slumped and lay unmoving, obscured by the smoke and fitful flames rising from the main body of the tree at the center of the room. The mannequin moved again when the unfortunate master fell next to it. Revived by the promise of blood and a dreadful instinct for survival, the creature leapt upon the prone man, mouth open, seeking a vein. He screamed loudly at the heat still emanating from the scorched wooden body. His cries turned to pitiful wails at the realization of what was happening. 2 teeth, sharp and furred like taproots, plunged into his throat, sending thin tendrils into his veins. "Hell's guts, Claire, get behind me!" Bill shouted. His gun barked again, killing the master and robbing his vile attacker of its sustenance. The mannequin raised her head. Red-stained tendrils slowly retracted into her dripping maw. "Mine," she insisted, spraying black drops heedless of the waste. What little blood she'd ingested had granted her sufficient strength to quell the flames on her body, and the soul of her true victim was still near at hand. "Come to me. You must be mine." Without thinking, Claire began to stand. Even now the voice drew her. "No, Claire, stay behind me!" Bill boomed in a tone that brooked no refusal. "We shall be free once we are together," the mannequin promised. "No more hunger, no more age, forever." "No, Claire!" Echo's cry stopped her. Frustrated, the statue rose jerkily, like a broken marionette. The glow from her eyes was dim, her body burnt and stained black. Claire's nemesis stood stiffly on its ragged right foot. Even in the harsh light of its burning parent, the thing seemed to be wrapped in smoke and shadow. The mannequin scuttled towards its maker. Its movements were jerky and frantic, yet somehow the creature was impossibly quick despite this handicap. The mannequin bore down on Claire, its clawed hands windmilling and reaching desperately for its dazed victim. But before Claire could close the distance, the flame of Bill's torch blocked its way. Still blind with frustration and need, it leapt to the left, trying to avoid the obstacle. As fast as the creature moved, the flame was faster. Again and again the desperate creature lunged, but the torch in Bill's hand blocked it, holding it back with the only fear it knew. "Echo, Claire, run!" Bill danced away from another raking claw while trying to keep his torch alight. Claire was too tired and scared for even a pretense at bravery. Freed from the last shreds of the creature's glamour, she stumbled headlong down the dim stone corridor. With only the glow of an occasional torch to guide her, she could have quickly lost herself in the labyrinth. But Echo scurried along the wall a little ahead of her, guiding her and doing his best to stop her from collapsing before they could reach the exit. The unwholesome atmosphere in the stone chamber was thick with smoke. Bill dared not blink or cough. One wrong move and the mannequin would be on him. It was thirsty and dangerous in the growing heat, ready to take almost any risk, dare anything to get to the soul that might end its tearing, gnawing hunger. "A beast is most dangerous at bay," a memory from his childhood reminded him. "Finish it quickly." Again the talons came within a hair's breadth of spilling his blood. Again the torch drove her back. But torches do not last forever, and she would not always miss. With a surprisingly steady hand he thrust his empty pistol into his belt and drew his sword. The steel flickered like an undulating snake in the firelight, its edge almost translucent in its sharpness. A weapon perfectly balanced and shaped, death its only purpose. Was it strong enough or sharp enough to cut down this enemy, or would it snag and snap in the dense wood? There was only one way to tell. With a roar that could have emptied a merchantman's deck, Bill lunged forward. The creature danced backwards, then noticed that he was too slow in bringing the torch back onto line. Like a cat it pounced, mouth wide, fingers stretched for his throat, blistered wood grazing his skin. The sword slashed out wildly, blurred, then turned into a feint at the last moment. The mannequin's fingers slipped and closed on air. Somehow her opponent was behind her and the razor steel was shearing through her neck. Precious red sap exploded from her and she slumped forward, her head virtually severed. Bill had no time to examine his handiwork before 2 robed figures burst into the room. The smaller of the 2 turned to run, while the second advanced further into the smoky chamber. Both men froze at the sight of the tall buccaneer who seemed to coalesce from the smoke. Neither man appeared sure of how to react to this threatening apparition, so, taking no chances, the pirate advanced, raising his sword. "No further if I were you," he warned quietly. "I was just leaving anyways." Though still obviously shocked by the scene before them, the masters wasted no time in sending a mental barrage against the intruder. But instead of leaving him sobbing on the ground, their attacks were met with an iron resistance that turned them aside with ease. "Who are you, and what are you doing here?" an attacker demanded. He wanted to know that too. Bill answered, gesturing towards the partially charred master lying near the smoky remains of the tree. "Anton!" one of the men breathed, horrified. "You!" Now, let's not say anything we'll regret. I could speak volumes on what I think of people who barter in children's souls." "Blasphemy! The child's soul would have lived forever in that shell." the nearest man said, looking across the room regretfully at Claire's ruined carving. Do you imagine that you have done her some favour by preventing her ascension? Ignoring the master's question, Bill examined a nick left in his sword by his recent attempt at decapitation. Damn it to 12 hells, he murmured. Now I'll have to sharpen it. Savage! You dare invade this sacred place? The second man said in disgust. Bill's only answer was a flurry of action. Even in a temper, he could not bring himself to kill unarmed men. But the sword's heavy hilt cannoned into the man's face, dropping him instantly to the floor. The other man started to move, but was brought up short by the coldness of the blade at his throat. If you value your lives, you will not follow, Bill warned grimly. You cannot hope to escape. It's always the same. Your type is full of what I can't do, he said, spitting on the downed foe. If the world were so beset with limitations, could that witch on the Black Isle still spin her webs? If you can sleep knowing what was done in this room, and others like them, anything is possible. They will find you, the man insisted, a bead of sweat running down his face. Won't be the first time, Bill grinned. Mustn't complain, saves me having to look for them. Now on your knees. Please, the man groaned, sinking to the ground. I'm leaving now. I'll be taking my time. Should you look back too soon, you lose your head. So best keep looking forward till you're sure I'm gone. So saying, Bill slipped the blade from the back of his prisoner's neck and melted soundlessly into the shadows of the corridor. This way! Echo called, guiding him through the twisting passages. The school is still asleep, but the caretaker's already about. How's Claire? Bill asked, stepping into the relative cool of the school's tiny wine cellar. Claire now knew the real reason it was off limits to all but the staff on pain of the harshest punishment. Even if a student had been brave enough to explore the cellar, the door had been carefully camouflaged to seem like part of the wall. It was no surprise that it had kept its secrets. I'm all right. Claire tried, but she sounded shaky even to her own ears. No, you aren't, but you are brave. Bill put a hand on her shoulder to steady her. I want my clothes. There may be some in here, Bill said, handing her a bundle from his pack and looking away in order to give her privacy. Leastways they were in the drawer of your room. Sure enough they were hers, drab and well worn, but as she slid the tunic over her head and pulled on the much-mended leggings, they seemed fine enough for a queen. As she reached into the small bundle in search of shoes, her hand closed on the cold smoothness of a scrying bowl. Her scrying bowl. So like the texture of the mannequin, it made her flesh crawl. In one quick movement she lifted the wooden bowl and made to hurl it against the wall. Before the bowl could leave her hand, Bill's rough fingers closed over her wrist. Don't destroy what'll be useful to spite what's gone. The buccaneer intoned as if quoting some obscure adage. You weren't meant to be looking, she protested, angry at him for having stopped her. Nor was I. Bill gently eased her arm down so that the bowl rested at her side. Not everything you learned is corrupt, Claire. You revenge yourself best by using what they have taught you against them. What do you mean? Your brother really said nothing to you? No, he never got the chance. Do you know where he is? All too well, Claire. All too well. But we can't do him any good by waiting here to be discovered. You mean they took him to face one of those things? No, he would not have suffered that fate. Why? What have they done to him? What would that thing have done to me? Claire asked, almost babbling. The answers are too long, and I have no time yet to give them. Let me simply say that you must use the bowl to save us both. How can I do that? By navigating, but not as you were taught. You should know, Claire, there is no safety for you now, in this world or any other. The Brotherhood has only ever survived by moving our navigators with us. I don't know if I can. Where do you want to go and how? To answer your first question, you can, or you would never have been given to the tree, especially so young. What did that thing have to do with being a navigator? Everything. Have you ever seen a ship with a figurehead on the prow? Of course, but she stopped, silenced by a dreadful intuition. You're in a unique position to know that some, not all mind you, but some of those beautiful ladies were once alive, and those ships do not falter, not like mine did. Their captains could chart a course through all the holes in a Swiss cheese with a fart for wind. I would have become one? A chill went through her at the thought. Bill nodded. Your soul trapped forever in a part of whatever Axis ship needed guiding. For a moment, the prospect of staring out from those yellow eyes over the endless waves overwhelmed her. To answer your other questions, Bill said, quickly trying to distract her from darker feelings, there are other worlds. I think I've seen them. They all said I didn't, but what I saw was real. Claire spoke numbly, her mind flickering to the image of a storm-tossed sea. That may well be, though I'm sure they left you with a lot to learn. All I ask for the moment is you find me a gate off this plane and save us both. But how will we get there? The same way as our enemies, my dear, by ship. I happen to have already invested in a modestly sized one that could be manned by ourselves and a few similarly inconvenient souls. The statue, what about... Dead. I saw to that. But let's put a distance between ourselves and our masters as soon as possible. What do you say? What about my brother? Perhaps in time, Bill answered, drawing her away. I won't go unless you swear to help him. Claire persisted stubbornly. Me neither, Echo said, thrusting out his crest. I will do what I can. I can promise no more. Bill was becoming angry at being pressed. That will have to be good enough for you, or you will have to stay here and face whatever comes to find you. I fear nothing, the gecko responded defiantly, giving a shrill growl. Hey, don't leave without me! The reptile scuttled after his companions into the twilight of dawn. Fabian had been on his knees, staring into the smoke-filled room for a minute or more. His throat burned and his eyes were bloodshot, but he didn't dare turn around. It briefly occurred to him to wonder why he was being so compliant, but pride assured him that it was fear rather than some subtle command that kept him on his knees. He was an adept, after all. Before he gained enough courage to look behind him, something moved in the smoke. Anton, are you alive? Anton, is that you? Answer! All intentions of turning or raising the alarm were lost as he strained his teary eyes into the impenetrable smoke. At last he picked out 2 faint points of yellow, like dying stars in the swirling nebula of the airless room. Helplessly he advanced, staying close to the floor for air. Anton? He managed once before the black hand grasped him and drew him close in an impossibly tight embrace. Fabian lived long enough to hear his bones cracking as his attacker squeezed the last drops of blood from him. Then, once it was sure that the new growth would support its head, the mannequin crawled forward to its next unconscious meal. Outside, the sun had risen. It was aware of this, as it was of all the earth's rhythms. It must wait, gaining strength, until the moon was once more in the sky. It forced down its frustration. It would find its prey sooner or later. The vampire was implacable and deathless.